We'll go ahead and call the this hearing to order, and Ranking Member Velasquez will be just a little bit delayed. She had a meeting at the White House that she had to attend, and so she'll be back in just a little bit. But we'll go ahead and start the hearing. We do have a series of votes that will be coming up, so we're going to try to move through as quickly as we can. But I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. As we examine several innovative ways that states are attracting, retaining, and growing businesses. And I appreciate, again, all of you coming in. Some of you come from a good distance. There's competition raging in our country, and it's not competition with the results published on the sports page. It's competition that is being played out on the front page and on the business page. States are in a fierce, competitive situation to create friendly environments to attract new businesses, to keep businesses they have and grow them, to both boost the economy and create jobs. Each year, several trade associations, news media outlets, and think tanks attempt to rate each state to determine the best, which are the best ones for businesses. And just this week, CNBC released their 2003 rankings for America's top states for businesses. Forbes magazine and Thumbtack.com, along with the Kauffman Foundation, released similar lists this year. While the methodologies for each of these surveys and studies slightly differs, they all judge states on criteria such as the cost of doing business, regulatory and tax regimes, and access to capital. And the states we have represented at our hearing today consistently perform in the top 15 of these surveys, proving to be the cream of the crop when it comes to working for greater business development. Although growth has been exceptionally weak following the recession nationally, the states represented here have bucked that trend and outpaced the national averages, some by significant margins. States like Virginia, Texas, Kansas, and South Dakota have significantly lower unemployment than the national average. And states like Texas, Utah, and Florida have outpaced the national gross domestic product average of 2.5% in 2012. Simply put, some states are making excellent headway at attracting businesses to their states and growing their the economies accordingly. And these states are not just courting businesses from other states, but also enticing companies with facilities overseas to come back to America. These states are proving that with lower taxes, smarter and less burdensome regulatory regimes, access to affordable energy, the United States can and will continue to be a place where things are built and entrepreneurs can innovate and thrive. Again, I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. Again, Ranking Member Velasquez won't be able to give her opening statement, but she will submit it for the record. And with that, what I will do is turn to Congresswoman Noem from South Dakota, introduce our first witness, and welcome, by the way, to the committee.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and I appreciate the chairman allowing me the opportunity and the privilege of introducing a special guest that we have here from South Dakota today. I'm proud and honored to have the opportunity to introduce all of you to Pat Costello. I've known Pat for many years and continue to be impressed by his leadership for our state of South Dakota and his desire to grow and to sustain a healthy economy for us back home, but also for our country. As the Commissioner of the South Dakota Governor's Office of Economic Development, Mr. Costello is a leader in bringing high-quality jobs to our state and high-performing employees as well to South Dakota. While we work in Washington to support policies that encourage job growth and innovation, Mr. Costello is doing the same thing back in South Dakota. We're fortunate that in South Dakota our economy has remained strong. We continue to have relatively low unemployment, less than half of the national average. Numerous rankings have shown that South Dakota is one of the best states in the country to do business and continues to give individuals a great quality of life. In fact, the Small Business Survival Index has rated South Dakota's business climate as #1 in the country for new businesses and startups. Mr. Costello knows this firsthand. Since moving to South Dakota, he's operated several small businesses in Sioux Falls, which is our largest city. Before his appointment to Commissioner, Mr. Costello proudly served on our City Council for the City of Sioux Falls from 2006 to 2010. He was also Chairman for the year of 2009 through 2010. Beyond creating jobs and furthering economic development within our state's borders, Mr. Costello also finds time to give back to causes that matter the most to him. He currently sits on the board of directors for the Children's Care Hospital, which is a wonderful facility that cares a lot about children and their families and school, and is a member of the Rotary Club. Pat knows what it takes to get the job done. And in South Dakota, we feel very lucky to have him. I'm very fortunate to be here. It's great to have him. I know that you will enjoy hearing his testimony today, and I'd like to thank him for taking the time to travel all the way to D.C. It's quite a trip. I know it pretty well. and to discuss the importance of small business and the growth opportunities we have for our country. So with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
So, go ahead.
Mr. Chair and Representative Noem, thank you very much. You know, it's always a pleasure to talk about the great state of South Dakota. And again, my name is Pat Costello, and I serve as the Commissioner of the Governor's Office of Economic Development. I've been in that role for about 2.5 years, and I've been in small business in South Dakota for about 20 years. I'd like to take a few minutes and share with you a little bit about our state and why it's a great place to do business and what we as public servants are doing to ensure that we remain a good place to do business. First and foremost is our tax climate. It is unmatched by any other state in the nation. Only in South Dakota do businesses enjoy the benefit of no corporate income tax, no personal income tax, no business inventory tax, no personal property tax, and no inheritance tax. This structure leaves money where it belongs, in the pockets of our businesses, creating a more favorable environment for long-term business growth. And we like to say in South Dakota, profit is not a dirty word. I was asked today to testify on why South Dakota is a great place to do business. Well, a big part of that is our fiscal responsibility and common sense. When it comes to fiscal responsibility, you'd be hard-pressed to find a state that would rank higher than South Dakota. For the last 123 years, we have consistently balanced our budget. 2 years ago, like most of the country, we were faced with some serious budget issues. We buckled down, made the cuts that were necessary, and today we are in a better financial situation than most other states in the country. If we want serious, financially sound companies operating in South Dakota, we need to set the example as the state. I've already mentioned our favorable tax climate, but I also want to talk about our favorable regulatory and our consistency of our business leaders. When I started in our office, I read something in one of our promotional brochures. In South Dakota, our business climate doesn't change with the political winds. That statement was written back in the 1980s when Citibank moved some of its credit card operations to South Dakota when the state legislature allowed expansion in compliance with the old Federal Bank Holding Act. Today, the financial service industry is thriving in South Dakota. As a matter of fact, in 2012, South Dakota's total bank assets topped $2.6 trillion, which totaled 18% of the country's bank assets, and landed our state as the #1 ranking according to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So forward-thinking leaders back in the 1980s, followed by forward-thinking leaders in the next 30 years, have kept South Dakota a leader in economic development with reasonable regulation and low taxation. When our governor, Governor Dennis Dugard, was elected, one of his first things he did was to direct all state agencies to identify unnecessary laws and regulations and get rid of them. In 2 years, the executive agencies under Governor Dugard have found 374 rules, or 72,990 words, and 919 sections of codified law, or 75,266 words, to be repealed, and the process is less than half done. That's just good business. And corporate leaders quickly took note that this Midwest state was serious about maintaining the type of business climate needed for companies to grow and prosper. Another way South Dakota is able to continue to attract national and international companies like Bell Brands and Marmon Energy is by playing to our strengths. With a population of 830,000 people, we are one of the least populated states in the country. But in business, that can be a good thing. Our small size affords businesses looking to expand in or relocate to South Dakota direct access to government leaders. When Governor Dugard was campaigning, he promised to be the state's #1 salesperson for economic development, and there's no question that he has fulfilled that campaign promise. During the last 3 months alone, Governor Dugard has met with nearly 70 business leaders and site selectors from across the country to encourage them to continue to grow their business in or locate them to South Dakota. That kind of personal attention gets noticed. Another thing that gets noticed is our collaborative efforts for the people of South Dakota. Our business development team serves as a liaison with these business leaders and site selectors on a multitude of issues facing from financing to permitting. As every business leader knows, navigating permitting process can be time-consuming and frustrating. In South Dakota, we believe in working with businesses not only to make it happen, but to make it happen faster. As an example, we recently had one company that was able to receive an air quality permit from our Department of Environment and Natural Resources from start to finish in just 30 days. And we did it without cutting corners. And we believe the state should be an advocate, not a roadblock to doing business. Another way we attract business is by keeping our cost of living low, because in the business world, a low cost of living equals a low cost of doing business. According to a June 2013 study, the U.S. Commerce Department South Dakotans pay 87% of the national average for goods and services. Additionally, the U.S. Commerce Department just reevaluated the numbers for personal income, and South Dakota's growth was a whopping 10.4%, more than any other state in 2012. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to let others tell what they think of South Dakota is doing right as well. The Small Business and Entrepreneur Council evaluated 46 different economic factors and ranked South Dakota #1 for our business policies and entrepreneurial friendliness. We're also in the top for their top spot for small business survival. Our low debt and lack of unfunded pension liabilities and expensive state-funded programs lands us in the top of Barron's best-run states in America. Our state ranks on top for low tax burden, best business climate, and one of the highest average credit rankings. And of course, there's yesterday's CNBC ranking that puts South Dakota as the best-run state to do business. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to testify about this important topic, and I look forward to your questions.
I'll next turn to or yield to Mr. Helskamp for the next introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and former colleague, Nick Jordan, to my current colleagues. Nick and I served together in the State Senate for 12 of his 13 years. And prior to that, Nick spent much of his adult life promoting a positive pro-growth business environment in Kansas. He served as the founding president of the Overland Park Convention Visitors Bureau. And while in the Senate, I know personally Nick worked to promote issues that were important to small businesses especially. And in 2010, incoming Governor Sam Brownback tapped Nick to serve in his cabinet as Revenue Secretary. In that role, Secretary Jordan helped shepherd a tax reform package through the legislature and onto the governor's desk that will reduce income taxes, especially for small businesses, which make up about 97% of all Kansas businesses, and it will and is already promoting economic growth. In addition to promoting small business issues, Secretary Jordan and his wife Linda co-own a small business with their daughter Shelley, which is located in Shawnee, Kansas, where the Jordans have lived for nearly 30 years. He remains active in his church and community, serving on the board of directors of Shawnee Community Services. And Secretary Jordan, thank you for being here today to share your testimony on some pretty exciting news from Kansas. So thank you for joining us.
Chairman Graves and committee members, thank you for inviting us in today and allowing Kansas to tell our story. I'm going to focus a little bit on tax policy. Although we've had an office of repealer, the governor's done some pretty dramatic things with budget and regulations in the state of Kansas, but probably now the most notoriety we're getting on the tax policy that we've done in Kansas since Governor Brownback came into office. So the topic's very important to us, as small business in particular. The vast majority, as Congressman Helskamp said, of our private sector employers are small businesses. 77% have less than 100 employees. 98% of them have less than 100 employees. This means for Kansas families to flourish economically in the 21st century, we must have flourishing small businesses. With that in mind, Governor Sam Brownback has placed the utmost importance on pro-growth tax reform in the state level. We started with the clear-eye understanding that the taxes at the federal, state, and local levels are a complicated hodgepodge cobbled together over many decades. So to help small business, it's important to reduce the burden of complying with this onerous system while also reducing the overall tax burden. So since 2011, Governor Brownback and the Kansas legislature have teamed up to make the state's tax code fairer, simpler, and flatter for families and small businesses. This approach broadens the base and lowers tax rates for the benefit of the maximum number of Kansans. The result has been historic and innovative tax relief, focused on providing a shot of adrenaline into the heart of the Kansas economy. What makes Kansas' approach unique is how we are strategically accelerating tax relief to benefit small businesses. While individual income tax rates have been reduced 14% to 24% this year, starting in January 1st, for all Kansas taxpayers, they will by 2018 realize another 23% reduction in tax rates in the state of Kansas. So we've got a long-range plan on the individual. But what really is exciting is we've even gone further to boost small businesses. Starting this year, Kansas began exempting non-wage business income from state income tax. This is the type of income earned by the majority of small Kansas businesses, which typically are structured as LLCs, sole proprietorships, and S-corps, commonly referred to as pass-through entities, since the taxes for those business income are filed on individual income tax returns rather than corporate tax returns. By eliminating the state income tax for small businesses, we are sending the message that every business, every innovation, and every entrepreneur matters when it comes to creating jobs in Kansas. This is in addition to programs that we have to assist bioscience, tech, and Main Street businesses and entrepreneurs. We're encouraging small businesses to grow in other ways as well. For example, our tax policy encourages private sector investment by allowing companies to immediately expense their purchases of equipment and software as a state deduction. A small business can capture the full tax value of the money related to their investments, and by that they are keeping tens of millions of dollars each year, which can be reinvested into businesses. And we're seeing a tremendous increase of the year in the use of those deductions by small businesses in our returns this past year. Additional tax relief is being targeted to rural communities to stimulate small business startups in every corner of Kansas, not just in our urban centers. This is a pretty striking number, I think. By keeping an additional $4.1 billion in the pockets of Kansas citizens and businesses over the next 6 years, we hope to experience growth rates similar to the 9 states with zero personal income tax, which significantly outperform states that have the highest personal income tax rates. Recently, the Tax Foundation released a paper titled, "What is the Evidence on Taxes and Growth?" The special report found that data consistently point to significant negative effects of taxes on economic growth, even after controlling for various other factors such as government spending, business cycle conditions, and monetary policy. Every study in the last 15 years finds a negative effect of taxes on growth. If we intend to increase employment, we should lower taxes on workers and businesses that hire them. Therefore, in Kansas, we've been changing the dynamic that has led to an average economic result, so more families can achieve a meaningful increase in income and opportunity, and small businesses can invest in growth and new jobs. Models being recognized by our neighboring states, including the Chairman's home state of Missouri, certainly is taking notice of what Kansas is up to, and we hope others in the regions will join us so that the Midwest becomes a lot more attractive place to do small business. If I can, I'll quote your Speaker of the House, Mr. Chairman, in the Missouri House of Representatives, Tim Jones. He recently wrote in the Kansas City Star, "Kansas lawmakers have accomplished major tax reform and have managed to get the state economy back on track. These improvements are great for Kansans and challenge neighboring states to compete for business and job growth." On the other hand, Missouri's unemployment rate has plateaued at 6.6%. Perhaps most troubling for Missouri is the Kauffman Foundation you mentioned a moment ago, Small Business Climate Ranking, which gives Missouri a C and Kansas an A. Speaker Jones concluded, "Kansas has proven that competitive economic policies promote a business-friendly environment, attracting new companies, and with these new companies, more jobs. The facts are right in front of us." And I might make one little editorial comment if I can, because the question I'm asked most is, what's happening to your revenues since you've made all these cuts? We're 6 months into this new policy, and our revenues are up across the board. We're above estimates, and we're above actuals from last year. So the growth is, in the short term, at least at this point, paying off for us. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Jordan. Our next witness is Aaron Demerson, who's the Executive Director of the Office of Economic Development and Tourism in the Office of Texas Governor Rick Perry. The Office of Economic Development and Tourism is responsible for making the state of Texas a premier destination for business and travel. Prior to serving as Executive Director, Aaron was the District Director of Texas Business Development, responsible for domestic business expansion and recruitment, research, and international business recruitment. Aaron received a BA from Texas A&M and a banking diploma from the American Institute of Banking. Thank you for being with us today, and I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, again, my name is Aaron Demerson, and I have the pleasure of serving as Executive Director of the Economic Development and Tourism Division for the Office of the Governor in the great state of Texas. Thank you for the work your committee continues to do for small businesses and for the invitation to participate on this panel. It's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to do so. Over the course of the past 2 years and throughout the years, this committee has heard from some of the most notable representatives associated with small business. That's as it should be, and not surprising given the importance of small businesses to the U.S. economy, and in my case, the Texas economy. And as we speak here today, somewhere in Texas, someone is coming up with the next big idea, a better way of doing business, a better way of doing something that's never been done before. And fostering these innovative types of innovation is vital to keeping Texas at the forefront of the national economy. And when these innovators are ready to go to market, our hope is that the efforts of this committee, in collaborations with the efforts at the state level, will make it easy for them to succeed and thrive. We all know that big companies tend to draw the biggest headlines, and they do, in fact, have a very important role to play. But we also know the drivers of job creation in Texas and our nation are the small business men and women. These are bold entrepreneurs who take real risks pursuing their dreams of owning their own business. As a matter of fact, these represent the true vibrancy of the Texas economy, and their contribution to the positive economic climate is a large part of what has helped attract employers of all sizes to the Lone Star State. The committee is seeking information on why certain states are attractive to business. We have found that the continued attractiveness to Texas over the years is based on a number of reasons, with the major portion of this success and associated with the leadership and emphasis placed on job creation that has been championed by Governor Perry and our collective statewide elective delegation. We know that our second-to-none business-friendly climate has continued to help us attract new employees and create jobs. In this past legislative session, just as we had done in the past, we took the necessary steps to preserve the business climate that's made all of that possible. In some cases, these businesses were fleeing overtaxation, overregulation, and in other states, as they sought to expand or relocate to a place where they're free to succeed. And it is our thought that we can expect more of them heading our way as long as we remain committed to the principles that have helped make us the best state in the country to do business. One of the most important steps for attracting business to Texas is centered on keeping our taxes low, because dollars do far more to create jobs and prosperity when kept in the business owner's hands. To that end, we have continued to enact legislation that has a positive impact on small business. This year, we were able to make permanent the small business tax relief that was passed in 2009, which makes permanent the $1 million small business tax exemption. This important bill provides significant tax relief to over 140,000 Texas small businesses. We've worked hard also to keep a fair and predictable regulatory climate so that a company will know what to expect a quarter, 6 months down the line. The CEOs and CFOs understand this and continue to find it a very attractive alternative when considering expansion and/or relocation. We also have been at the forefront of the legal system to make it even harder to file frivolous lawsuits in Texas, and approved loser pay legislation, which requires those who file a frivolous lawsuit and lose to pay the potential court costs and legal expenses of those they sued. For us in Texas, economic development begins at the local level, and it is important that we have effective relationships at the local level to take advantage of the small business opportunities. To say that our communities are very aggressive and serious about small business and job creation is an understatement. We recently have passed legislation creating a small business advisory committee that will help us align even closer with communities on small business initiatives and issues. In Texas, as depicted in the handouts that I've passed to you, we have a state-by-state comparison document and a brag document as well. And as Governor Perry quite often says, in Texas, it ain't bragging if it's true. Fact of the matter is our unemployment rate has consistently been lower than the national average. We've continued to lead the nation in job creation over the years. We've also have the nation's best business climate, continue to be the #1 exporter 11 years running, and continue to have the highest number of expansion and relocation projects. All of this creates a great deal of attention and continues to be of great interest to a number of small business owners in the United States and internationally looking to expand or relocate their business. It didn't happen by accident. It happened because over the last decade, Texas leaders have made principled, thoughtful decisions by not overtaxing, overregulating, or overlitigating our citizens. In Texas, we have an obligation, responsibility, and goal to taxpayers to take the necessary steps to make government more efficient and streamlined while reducing spending without raising taxes. And lastly, only by keeping our families and small businesses strong can we continue the type of prosperity we've enjoyed in Texas over this past decade. So how do we continue to create new opportunities for Texas families and small businesses? We do this in Texas by continuing to apply a laser-like focus on small business retention and recruitment while showcasing the best of what Texas has to offer. In addition, we will continue to ensure for small businesses a climate at the state level that is conducive to making a profit, creating jobs, and enjoying success. Our hope, Mr. Chairman and committee members, is that the same or a similar approach is viewed at the federal level. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity, welcome you to visit our great state, and look forward to the discussion and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Demerson. Our next witness is Mr. Jim Chang, who's the Secretary of Commerce and Trade for the Commonwealth of Virginia. In this capacity, he manages the Jobs and Opportunity Agenda for Virginia and oversees 13 state agencies focused on promoting the growth of Virginia's business community and attracting new investment into Virginia's economy. Secretary Chang holds a B.S. in Computer Science from Old Dominion University, an MBA from Colgate-Darden Graduate School of Business at the University of Virginia, and a J.D. from Georgetown University Law Center. Thank you for being with us. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, and other distinguished members of the committee. Again, I'm Jim Chang, Secretary of Commerce and Trade for Virginia. Let me begin by conveying Governor Bob McDonnell's regrets that he could not be here today to testify before you. But also on behalf of the Governor and the Commonwealth, I thank you for allowing me to testify today in his stead. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy. Across Virginia and throughout the United States, small businesses are creating jobs and opportunity. In Virginia, we've been focused on job creation and economic development with special attention to the important role of small businesses in our economy. Last year, the Governor announced 2012 as the year of the entrepreneur. Throughout the year, among other things, the Governor held monthly office hours with small business owners, conferences and roundtables across the state, and featured profiles in entrepreneurship. And we continued our efforts at job creation in 2013 through efforts like our Rural Jobs Council. The Council's recommendations made it clear that there are new challenges facing small businesses in today's global economy. They recommended that we invest in workforce development, infrastructure, and broadband. The Council also recommended that we create a Governor's School for Entrepreneurship to encourage middle school students to consider entrepreneurship as a career option. In Virginia, we continue to focus on things that matter to entrepreneurs: access to capital, workforce development, and a predictable and accountable government. Virginia's small businesses need to know that they will have ready access to capital. In 2012, we enacted a bipartisan solution to encourage long-term investments in Virginia's small businesses. The Virginia Small Business Investment Grant encourages private investment by providing a grant equal to 10% of a qualified investment for an eligible investor. We've also invested in our Virginia Small Business Finance Authority. The authority aids Virginia's financial institutions in offering business loans that they may not be able to offer without the authority's assistance. Agriculture and forestry continues to be Virginia's largest industries, generating a combined $79 billion annually and creating more than 500,000 jobs across the state, mostly by small businesses. So we passed legislation to establish the Governor's Agricultural and Forestry Industries Development Fund, targeting those industries that have been largely overlooked in the state's traditional economic incentive programs. Of great importance to the Commonwealth and the nation is our ability to compete in technology innovation. With high-tech, high-growth startups creating more than 30% of all new jobs, our administration has invested in an environment that encourages the formation and growth of these companies. We created incentives to recruit and attract angel and venture capital investment, and since 2010, our seed stage investment programs have created over 75 new high-tech companies that have attracted private capital at a rate of $17 for every $1 of public funds invested. A key to entrepreneurial growth at the local level is to support regional capacity building. We launched a grant program called Building Collaborative Communities. The program promotes regional economic collaboration in economically distressed areas to stimulate job creation, economic development, and build community capacity and leadership. One of the most important issues for small business is workforce development and the quality of education. Small businesses thrive because of their ability to recruit, train, and retain qualified employees. In our past legislative sessions, the Governor has passed numerous innovative and bold K-12 and higher ed reforms that will keep Virginia's workforce at world-class levels. Small businesses need predictability and efficiency. Last year, the Governor launched a regulatory reform initiative to reduce the number of burdensome regulations placed on small businesses. We asked industry and small business for ideas and specific sections of code that were overly burdensome. As a result, since September 2012, 562 sections of the Code of Virginia have been identified, and 157 sections have already been repealed. But ultimately, it is not what the federal or state government can do for small business that matters, but how government can ensure it does not erect unnecessary barriers to job creation. We must ensure an environment conducive to economic vitality and guard against extinguishing the entrepreneurial spirit with overly burdensome laws and regulations. Our work has gotten results. When the Governor took office, unemployment in Virginia stood at 7.3%, but now it stands at 5.3%, our lowest unemployment rate in over 4 years. Since the beginning of our administration, Virginia has added 171,000 net new jobs, 153,000 of which are from the private sector. And the number of unemployed Virginians had decreased by a total of 80,000, or about 36%. And simply put, more Virginians are working today. So thank you again for inviting us to speak, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you all of you. I'm going to turn to Mr. Holzkamp to start questions, but I got to tell you, it's exciting to hear the success that your states are having, and obviously I've watched what Kansas is doing just right across the border and seeing businesses leave the state of Missouri for Kansas, unfortunately. But regardless with that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Holzkamp. First questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It really is a shame of those those businesses that are moving to Kansas, and we follow up with that. But question for Secretary Jordan, if I might, with a pretty big, massive, comprehensive tax reform package. It did a lot on the individual side, but not much, if anything, on the corporate side. Can you give any directions of what happens at the state level when you're trying to do comprehensive tax reform, and what happens with those players? And I think may be of great interest.
The Congressman knows when I was in the Senate, I wrote a lot of economic development incentive programs, and we had a lot of discussions about that while we were serving together. But we are, like all states, have a significant package of incentives and tax credits to offer to C Corps to come to our state, and probably as competitive as any state, obviously, in those packages. We actually, the Governor's desire was to lower corporate income tax to zero. And when we started having those meetings, we actually found that some of our C Corps, some of our corporations would rather be incentive and tax credit members rather than a zero tax credit at this time, and we had a hard time doing it. So we actually did not lower the corporate income tax rate in Kansas at this time. We'd still like to work on that. We'd still like to work with the corporate community to make that happen. Right now, 59.6% of our C Corps pay no income tax in Kansas because of the incentive and tax credit programs. And again, my statistics, when 98% of your businesses are 100 employees less, 77% of them are 10 employees or less, and by all statistics, whether some say 2/3 of your job creation comes out of small business, some say 75% come out of small business, we decided to swing very quickly over to the small business, who many times can't take advantage of the incentive and tax credit programs because the thresholds are so high, it's hard for them to take advantage of it. So we swung and decided we would work what we can to help small business grow in the state of Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. A question from Secretary Chang as well, if I would. What do you hear from small businesses in particular as their biggest complaint about the Federal Government and the Federal policies and regulations? If you give us a little insight there.
Mr. Congress, I think the main thing they say is there's too much of everything, too much regulation, too many things coming down the line, and the uncertainty. Being from Virginia, we have a very large military presence, very large U.S. government civil service sector too. So worries of sequestration and what follows are very concerning. So we hear that especially from our small business community, who are the most affected by little shifts in policies and spending. So all the regulation, perhaps even uncertainty in health care, taxation, and government spending, all are a big part of it. So if they knew what was coming down the line, they could adjust. But since they don't know, they're all very worried.
Gentleman from Texas and South Dakota, if you have a comment.
I'd echo the comments there. Uncertainty is huge. That's why in Texas we've made that a focal point to make sure that that things are not changing, but that uncertain efforts at the state, federal level has a certain impact on the small business in Texas.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, in business world, people just want to understand what the rules of the game are, but when the rules keep changing, it's challenging for them. So to know that the regulatory process was going to be consistent, the tax policy was going to be consistent, that there was a fiscal balanced budget from a federal level would be very helpful. All those things weigh into it.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry that I was late, but I was in the White House meeting with the President. So. Mr. Secretary Chang, I am so glad to hear that unemployment rate is so low in Virginia, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. And I guess that in some ways, a lot has to do with the federal government presence in Virginia, whether it's federal spending or federal contractors, because you have one of the highest number of federal contractors in the nation.
Yes.
My question to you is, yes, regulation, of course, impact heavily small businesses, but I would like to hear, have you done any, and I will ask the question to any of the other members of the panel, have you done any type of analysis in terms of regulations that are duplicative in terms of the federal regulations as well as the state governments? Have you ever done any analysis that will make recommendations either to the states where you're coming from or the federal government?
Yes, ma'am. If I just can give you a quick answer, the answer is yes. We have set up commissions to look at the federal regulations that we think that we think may be burdensome or may be affected by certain changes. I don't have that all that information now, but we certainly can get more information for you. And yes, Virginia is very fortunate to have the federal spending. But then again, we have a lot of federal spending contract-wise, but in terms of other types.
But my question is, have you ever done any analysis in terms of state regulations that are being duplicative in terms of federal regulations?
Oh, duplicating.
Yeah, what federal regulations are in place?
I'll have to look at that, but I'm
because that will be a great way to help us, or for the state government to say that it doesn't make sense that if we have them in the books, in terms of federal regulations, why to have the same type of regulation at the state level?
That's wonderful. I'll check on that.
You have 72,000 civilian defense workers in Virginia.
Yes, we do.
And that are going to be and are impacted by the sequester.
Yes.
What impact will this have on the state of the economy, particularly in Northern Virginia, where so many of these jobs are located?
Well, ma'am, I believe that that's the question that needs to be answered. So far, our unemployment rate has held steady, and actually, as you mentioned, it has come down. But now with some furloughs coming up, that may affect us. Mm-hmm. And we are hanging on and waiting. So far, our budgets have been fine, but we believe that there will have to be some effect. And, of course, the long-term effect is we understand there must be changes in spending habits of the federal government, and we're prepared for those. Our companies, I think, are just waiting for the direction on which way to go. Ma'am.
Recently, Admiral Jonathan Greener, the Chief of Naval Operations, addressed Hampton Road business leaders and told them that he's preparing for 2014 to be much like this year. That means cuts in military operations, ship construction, and more civilian furloughs. What impact will these cuts have on Virginia if they are sustained over the next few years?
Ma'am, if I can answer that, I think there are a couple of thoughts there. And one is the original sequester was very, very, stilted, and a lot of our people told us that they could not make any judgment calls. And I think there has been some changes to make it a little better so they can prioritize. I think that's a big plus. But I think our concern is mostly for the small businesses that we're talking about today, because we believe they will be the first ones impacted on any cutbacks.
The uncertainty, right? They will not be able to plan. There will be 72,000 civilians that will have less money to spend as consumers.
Right. And it all will have a big effect. We don't know what it is.
So it is our job in Washington, for the good of the state economies, to address the issue of sequestration.
Absolutely.
Don't you agree? Mr. Jordan, like many other states, Kansas has been forced to make some difficult spending decisions while also ensuring that you raise revenue. How is Kansas balancing the need for revenue to fund things like education, child care, with the goal of tax simplicity?
As I mentioned earlier, our revenues are up under this new tax policy. And actually, when the governor first took office, we were left with, I think it was literally $800 in the bank, a $500 million hole in our budget. And within 1 year, we turned that around to a $500 million surplus in our budget by efficiencies. All agencies are looking at efficiencies, better way of operating, and we found several savings in doing so and have been able to save quite a bit of money in that. The governor said time and time again, I'm going to fund the core responsibilities of government, and I've been Senate elected position. And those debates will always be, are you funding it enough, or you're not funding it enough, or, what kind of funding should we have in there? The governor's budget this year proposed funding for education. He particularly fought for higher education in his budget. Along with the tax plan, we had a plan that funded what he wanted to fund. Obviously, went through the legislative session. They made some additional cuts, but that was not the governor's desire in his budget.
I just want to hear your angel investor tax credit.
Yes.
It really meant to bring investors to invest in local businesses. Has this credit been effective?
It's been very
in
effective.
sparing?
Very effective. We've really enjoyed a lot. I actually helped co-author a bioscience initiative in Kansas that raised us to the number 5 in the nation in biotechnology, and the venture angel investor tax credit was a part of that process, and really helped us bring the biosciences up in Kansas and startups in bioscience, working with our researchers at our universities. It's been an extremely successful program. I can't give you numbers off the top of my head, but we have kept that tax credit, want to keep that tax credit, and that tax credit's brought a lot of new money. We're obviously not a big venture capital state. We're becoming more and more venture capital because of the bioscience growth and some of our tech growth. Google has made a big investment in Kansas in some of their high-speed, cable. So in all ways, it's been a very, very good program, very good tax credit for us.
Mr. Demerson, Texas is now a majority-minority state for the first time in its history. What sort of policies does it have to promote minority business development?
In terms of minority business development, a number of the state agencies in Texas, whenever you're looking at doing business with the state, there are goals that are set within some of those agencies. And so we're going out statewide promoting the benefits of doing business in Texas, and those hub or minority-owned businesses are part of any of those activities that are taking place at the state level. So we've always been doing that in the past, and we'll continue to do even more in the future.
Do you have any metrics to compare 2 years, the last 5 years?
Yeah, each of the agencies actually have their own set goals and metrics in-house. And so from the governor's office standpoint, I don't have the overall view, but each agency, if you're dealing with TxDOT, Department of Transportation, or any of the other agencies, they all have those goals and metrics.
Do you have any oversight to make sure that those state agencies are doing what they're supposed to be doing?
I think from the governor's standpoint, being the leader of that state, he has oversight over all of those activities and has done a phenomenal job of reaching out to make sure that those things are in place.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for being late. I wasn't invited to the White House. I'm shocked. Appreciate you gentlemen taking the time to be able to be here. It's great to be able to hear some of these stories of success, the entrepreneurship, and did have a couple of questions. Mr. Jordan, very interesting story where you had $800, did you say, or in the bank, and $500 million surplus now?
Right.
And you were able to achieve this, you'd noted, by actually letting American people keep more of their money and actually reinvest those dollars rather than handing it over to government. But you also noted that you created some efficiencies.
Yes.
And do you think that that is a tale that when we look at, say, sequestration, do you think it's palatable for the federal government to reduce the rate of increase by 2%?
From our experience, yes. We found a lot of efficiencies in the state of Kansas. The governor has worked hard at us looking at better ways of doing things, and we've certainly, I think, are proof you can do that. You can go into agencies, you can work with state agencies and find a lot of efficiencies and savings in those agencies. The governor's been real big. We've got a statute that requires a 7.5% ending balance, and I think Congressman Hillscamp would agree with me. I don't quite remember the last time we had a 7.5 ending balance in Kansas, except for when Governor Brownback came in and required us to have a 7.5 ending balance. So in that turnaround to a $500 million surplus, we also got the state back on a good footing with a good ending balance every year in our budget going forward.
Well, Secretary Chang, we were talking a little bit about the sequestration end of it. Is it pretty much your sense as well that it ought to be the responsibility of the federal government maybe to do what the state of Virginia has done? Actually show some responsibility and innovation not to grow government, but to reduce its size and empower the American people with their own dollars?
Yes, sir. I think that's something our governor would absolutely commend. It's something that we've worked very hard about. We came in 3.5 years ago with a huge deficit, and for the past, and I don't know if it's public soon, but we're hoping that we'll have four straight years of positive remaining balances in our budget, and that comes from cutting back things that we have to cut back.
You know, and I'd like to maybe get all of our panel's comment on this. I think one of the great challenges that we face, I'm a small businessman coming out of the state of Colorado. A lot of our big worries really aren't so much about what's coming out of the state, but what's coming out of Washington, D.C. with a one-size-fits-all regulatory pattern. I believe we have the statistics out of this committee that we're spending $10,685 per employee in just compliance, following rules and regulations. This is not even taking into account yet the full impact of the Affordable Care Act and how devastating that's going to be to job creation and health care ultimately in this country. Is it your sense that some of those regulations are left best to the state, given the differences between Virginia, South Dakota, Texas, and Kansas? Let's make some of those rules to be able to fit our own particular needs for our own geography and our own people.
As from a Texas standpoint, you know, we look at it as quite simple. You don't spend what you don't have. You know, if you don't have it, you don't spend it. It's a simple equation there. We were fortunate and blessed with a $12 billion budget surplus in the state, and we were able to do some things with that this past legislative session that were moving us further down the line. And so we take pride in doing what we need to do at the state level, making sure that there's an impact, and then we're looking forward to that on the federal side to match us wherever we can to make sure that we're moving forward.
Great. And Mr. Costello, I'd like to, with South Dakota, you talked about a strong banking community there. Are your small businesses, given the regulations that we're seeing out of Dodd-Frank, the threat of further regulations out of Basel III, are your small community banks really worried about their ability to be able to deliver loans to their customers?
I think we do hear from our small bankers that the increasing regulatory environment is very challenging for them. You know, in South Dakota, we've got the largest bank assets of any state, $2.6 trillion. I think a lot of that has to do with the reasonable regulations that we offer in the state of South Dakota and the competent people that we have in our division of banking. We hear from banks that have moved their charters to the state that they're comfortable with our regulators and that they're very knowledgeable. And so I think that's important for them to be comfortable. And of course, our tax structure as well. No corporate income tax in our fee structure for banks as well is very attractive.
Okay, thanks. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Demerson, I was going through the brag sheet that you provided, and I'm not sure I agree that if it's true, it's not bragging. Just ask any grandmother. And the 2012 CNBC ranking of America's top states for business caught my attention. And for the honor of the great state of California, I can't resist pointing out that in the CNBC survey that ranked Texas best for business, did still rate the quality of life in California a full 15 places ahead of Texas. Okay, so with the dig aside, I actually want to focus on another category of the CNBC ranking. And while Texas ranks first overall, the only individual category measured that Texas ranks first in is infrastructure and transportation. Texas has held on to that first place ranking in infrastructure in the 2013 rankings as well. Wanted you to maybe expand and tell this committee what you think the importance of world-class infrastructure is to the success and health of small businesses.
Yeah, it's been something that's been very important to the state from a logistics standpoint to have the infrastructure in place. I'm going to read over an infrastructure fast facts sheet that we have here. And so in Texas, 2 logistics complexes, Fort Worth Alliance and San Antonio's port. I mean, serious logistics complexes that are driving business to our state, 47 freight railroads, 624 miles of coastline, #1 installed wind capacity, 26 commercial airports, 10 interstate highways, 16 protocols, and 4.8 million barrels of oil that's coming in. But the infrastructure that's put in place, and now even to this day, where we're in a special session in Texas with our legislative session, they're addressing transportation needs even to this day, where we're looking at what's the future hold for us and how we're going to impact that. All of that has an important impact on small businesses. If we get the logistics right, then they're in a position to grow even more so. The Panama Canal expansions, all those things that are there, we're trying to position ourselves in Texas to be in a position to take advantage of those opportunities. And small businesses benefit if we make the right decisions in our state in regards to that.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that. And I hope Congress hears that, and I hope we really do invest in our infrastructure in this country, particularly our ports. And I was interested in Governor McDonald's written testimony when he pointed out the importance of helping small businesses find new markets across the seas. And one of the things I've done back here with my good friend Ted Poe from Texas, we both attended the same university in Abilene, and we founded the Ports Caucus back here because we would love to raise the level of awareness of our colleagues and the importance of the port. So I thought, Secretary Chang, if you could follow up on what he said. If we're going to really, I think that one of the biggest growth possibilities for small businesses is exporting. And I think if we could really teach, train, educate, help, handhold small businesses to understand that their goods and services actually are very valuable and are marketable overseas, but only if our ports have been maintained and dredged and improved and modernized to really help this aspect. Secretary Chang, did you just expand on what you see as the importance of exporting and how ports could play a role in that for our small businesses?
Yes, Congressman. Ports are very, very important. The governor's made at least 8 trips in his 3.5 years as governor overseas to Asia, to Europe, all over the world. And one of the first things that we talk about is logistics and ports and access. And with the Panama Canal, it'll be even more widening of the Panama Canal coming up in 2015. It will be even more important for the Asian countries to be able to access the East Coast of the United States, and all our East Coast ports, and of course the West Coast ports, will benefit from all that additional commerce. And if I can just add also about exporting, we have a program in Virginia called the Valet Program. It's the Virginia's Leaders in Export Trade. And what that is a 2-year program that we bring in qualified businesses, mostly small and medium-sized, that are ready to export. We put them through a 2-year program. It's rigorous. It's not every day, but it's rigorous. And they teach them everything from banking to lines of credit to how to market and how to approach companies overseas. And they end with a delegation overseas to a suitable place. And a lot of great stories have come out of that. It's an award-winning program, and I hope that it could be a benefit to some others, too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And our ports in L.A. Long Beach, we have a program called Trade Connect. And we're working particularly with minority and women-owned businesses. And again, if the small businesses can understand that it actually is viable, it's doable, and it could really be the difference in them really growing and being successful, I think that's where I'd love to see us all focus. I yield back the time that I don't have anymore.
Mr. Luke DeMar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly enjoy the conversation this afternoon. You gentlemen have really brought a breath of fresh air to the discussion of small business and the impact that state government can have. So my question, I guess, is twofold. I would like to ask each one of you, what's the number one thing, if you had one thing to point out, one reform? I mean, you guys have got a regular package of things that each of you have talked about, which is great. But if you had to talk about one thing that state government can do to improve small business, the small business environment in your state, and one thing that the federal government could do to improve the small business environment in your state, I'd sure appreciate it. I'll start with Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Congressman. I think from a state perspective, the one Achilles heels and challenge that we have is workforce We're a small state, 830,000 people, and for large corporations that are looking to locate in the state, sometimes that's a challenge. Our unemployment is 4%. And we try to focus more on the number of jobs we have in South Dakota, and we now have exceeded the number of jobs in the previous peak back in 2008 before the recession. So the economy is very strong, unemployment's low, our number of jobs are high, our employed people are high. So that's the challenge from a state level, is a workforce capacity, building that workforce capacity. On a federal level, I think what we hear from small businesses is just a desire to have some sort of fiscal policy. I think our business community has lost faith in the federal government, its ability to control spending, its ability to manage the affairs and regulatory environment, and I think a more stable federal environment would be very helpful for small business.
Secretary Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. I think one of the things we heard over and over from small business was capital flow. And that's why we really focused on tax policy at this point. Coming out of a recession, a lot of small businesses were really struggling, and the capital flow wasn't there to be able to grow the business, to make the investments, to hire the people. And so tax policy is important, both at federal and state level, for small business. I would echo the workforce development. I think one of our challenges is entrepreneurship in rural Kansas. How do we get more people involved in entrepreneurship? When we first came in this administration, we had 22 counties that had double-digit population decline in Kansas. And we sat down and tried to figure out, if I can promote another program we have for 5 seconds here, we sat down to try to figure out how to reverse that trend, and we came up with what we call rural opportunity zones. And what that meant is if you moved to Kansas from out of state to one of those counties, it's now up to 73 counties, by the way, the legislature's taken it and expanded it. If you move into one of those counties, from out of state, you get 5 years no income tax. That's been pretty successful. We just had our first round of tax returns to kind of know where we're at on that. But the part that's really been exciting is we offered students graduating from college, whether it was in-state or out-of-state, if you moved to one of those counties, we'd pay up to $15,000 of your student loans over a 5-year period. We've had over 800 students apply for that. Now you'd say, okay, great, all the Kansas students and Missouri students and everybody. It's come from 32 states. We've had students, and the top 3 degrees are law, engineering, and healthcare degrees. So they're professional young people looking back into rural areas. So when we talk about workforce development, we've been concerned about the rural areas and the entrepreneurship there and the businesses growing in our rural areas as well as our areas that are successful.
Okay. Mr. Demerson?
At the state level, I think what we can do is continue to educate. I think we have some fine examples in Texas. If you look at UTSA, they have a small business development center that's doing some phenomenal things on a statewide level that they've even gone international. And so I think duplicating a lot of those efforts and or sharing those successes statewide is what we're going to look at trying to accomplish at the state level. From the federal standpoint, it goes back to what's been mentioned time and time out, just the uncertainty, regulations, those type of issues are out there, and we hear those concerns. And so I think if that's addressed, or as that's being addressed, you have things that are taking place at the state level, things that are taking place at the federal level, and it will give small businesses more opportunities to succeed at that point.
Secretary Chan?
Yes. Well, I think my colleagues here have made some really great points, and I echo all of them. If I can add on to one thing on the federal side, obviously we talked about predictability, stability, and all that of regulations. That's very important. But one thing about workforce, I think, is that we get funding for workforce from so many different sources. It's difficult for a state to grasp it and get a hold of it. So somehow a little clarity, because there is a lot of workforce money out there, but how we control it. As Virginia, we try to do our best, and we have a great workforce, but we could do better. And part of it is how we handle it with the federal funds coming in. For small business, from a state point of view, what we could be doing better, and perhaps other states too, is getting our large cities with the venture capital, angel capital, and sources of funding closer to our rural parts of our state, because I heard some mention of rural before. That is also a concern in Virginia, and I'm sure many other states too. Okay. Thank you again.
Very good. I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Meng?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I want to follow up on a little bit of what Congresswoman Han started a conversation about in terms of infrastructure and how the federal government could be more helpful. I represent a pretty urban area in Queens, New York City, as so does the Ranking Member Velasquez, and just trying to see how the federal government can be more helpful in terms of infrastructure in relation to mass transit, whether it's trains, subways, or buses, perhaps, and more relevant in some of your areas. If you have.
Well, Congresswoman, transportation is something I've been trying to avoid all my career, so sorry about that. I just had to say that. But infrastructure is so very important, and the funding is so complex. I couldn't begin to discuss it, but I will say that I've gone on all the trips with our governor, and he's our best salesperson overseas to talk about bringing in business to Virginia, whether it be exports or direct investment or all this. But what usually we hear the most of is, what are your logistics? Your airports, your roads, your ports are so important to us. And they're our number one sales point, our location and how convenient it is for our rail system, for our roads, to get cargo from our ports to wherever in the country or across the Atlantic or through the Pacific. So we absolutely rely on our infrastructure. In fact, the CNBC rankings talk about infrastructure all the time, and I think it's a very good point. And our governor saw that, along with all the other feedback he's gotten, and he worked hard to come up in a bipartisan manner with the legislator to come up with a new transportation bill that many of you all will see in the committee in the Virginia area that I know will benefit the whole region and bring more businesses and attract more relocations and opportunities.
I think from my standpoint, you hear the ports talking about dredging opportunities. I mean, they're all talking about that and the need for those type activities to take place. In Texas, I have a document here that's Texas by air, land, and sea. We're very proud of the infrastructure that we have in place, but we're not complacent with it, and so we want to do even more so, and that's being addressed right now. Texas is a state that you're driving 3, 6, 9, 13 hours. You're still in Texas, and so we need to make sure that we are on top of it in terms of the logistics opportunities, and we have been fortunate to do that, but we're not resting on our laurels. We want to do more at the federal level, wherever that you guys can be impactful to the states or the communities. It's going to aid in our small businesses in our state.
Infrastructure is important. I think we have the 3rd or 4th largest number of highway miles in the country in Kansas, believe it or not. And so we've got a tremendous, and the legislature's always been fairly good about funding our infrastructure program in Kansas. About every 5 to 6 years, the legislature appropriates billions of dollars to make sure that infrastructure is kept up. But I would say the federal and state partnership is extremely important to get that done. We have a huge intermodal facility being constructed by Burlington Northern. It's going to be very important to us in shifting products around the country. Wichita, by the way, is one of the top exporter cities in the country. Of course, the aviation industry is there, but a lot of entrepreneurs there. So it's very important to us, and that partnership is important to us, but we've tried to pull our load.
Gentle lady, yield for a second.
Yes.
So I guess, Mr. Demerson and Jordan, you recognize the importance for the U.S. Congress to reauthorize legislation such as the highway bill and WRDA, Water and Resources, because that will provide resources that you need in order to keep transportation and infrastructure to the level that will allow for the states to continue to grow. Don't you? Yeah? Thank you.
Leading the witness.
I'd just like to add, too, that
yes.
businesses aren't going to expand or aren't going to grow without adequate infrastructure. I think that's just the fundamental premise of it. And in South Dakota, for us, our challenges are roads and rail, some air travel, but water as well. We're an agricultural state. Our products have to travel by rail to get to a port to get exported. So to continue to invest in those infrastructures is just fundamental.
Mr. Chairman, please let the record show that all the witnesses here support the reauthorization of the highway bill and WARDA.
We'd love to get the Senate to comply. Mr. Rice, real quick.
Quickly, I really appreciate your being here, and I have enjoyed hearing your success stories. And they all center on a business-friendly environment, lower taxes, lower regulation, good logistics. Let's say that you were the highest taxed state in the country. Would that help or hurt your competitiveness? Because that's where we are as a country.
I don't know which one, but I've spent the last 2 years learning economics from a lot of economists. And I think if you look at the tax foundation, your question is what high tax are you talking about?
You were the highest. Let's say you were the highest.
Income, sales, property.
Income
tax, I think it hurts your growth.
Yeah.
I think more and more studies are showing you income tax hinders your growth the most of all taxes. And so that would be the answer here is income tax is significant.
And let's say that the cost of the regulatory burden in your state was the highest among the 50. Would that help or hurt your competitiveness? Because that's where we are as a country. Right. And let's say that your infrastructure was crumbling relative to the other 50 and you had very little investment, because that's where we are as a country. Would that help or hurt your competitiveness?
It definitely would hurt our competitiveness.
Shame on us, because that's exactly where we are. I've spent the last 2 days going around this Capitol with Harvard professor Michael Porter, who's an expert in international competitiveness, and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much, and please, Secretary Jordan, tell Governor Brownback hello, and Mr. Emerson, please tell Governor Perry hello. Both are very good friends of mine. With that, again, I want to thank all of our witnesses for making the trip here to the committee. The United States is experiencing a very weak economy, and economists are predicting that's going to continue, or at least slow growth is going to continue throughout 2013. With that, I don't want to keep you all through an hour's worth of votes, but I do appreciate the bright, encouraging and optimistic view that you all have and what your states are doing. Is very, very impressive. And with that, I'd ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record without objection. That is so ordered. And with that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.